All right. Hello, everyone. So the title of my talk is on the anonymity guarantees of anonymous proof-of-stake protocols. And this is joint work with Markulf, Kohlweiss, Kartik, Nayak, and Alessandra, Scafuro. And I'm Varun. Right. Sorry. Yeah, the first thing I want to talk about is proof of stake. And this is probably familiar, to the audience here, but I'll just go over it anyway. So a proof of stake blockchain protocol is one in which all parties run a private lottery, which takes as input a stake, their stake and their own identities. And, it outputs either 0 or 1, which indicates whether they won the lottery or not. Now, when a party wins a lottery, it gets to decide the next block on the chain. Naturally, more the stake, greater the chance of winning the lottery, and therefore, greater the number of blocks that particular party can present or broadcast. So for example, here you can see that Bezos, in this example, who has the most stake, gets to decide more blocks on the chain. Okay, so now what is privacy preserving proof of stake? And now this is recent work by Thomas Kerber et al. And Chaya Ganesh et al. In recent work, and it's called Ouroboros Krypsis and proof of stake protocols for privacy aware blockchains. And the main idea in both of these works is sort of the same, where parties are still running the lottery, but instead of outputting, say, like instead of the stake or the identity, the parties are just going to output a computer zero knowledge proof, which proves that this lottery was computed correctly. And with each block, now when they propose, they're going to attach the zero knowledge proof. Now, any other party on the network can then verify that the zero knowledge proof is correct, and therefore know that, okay, this block was computed correctly with the correct amount of stake, etc. Now, one thing to note is that both of these works present these private protocols on the application layer. On the network layer, there's sort of a difference in these two works. Krypsis considers a public network. So that is, the network is completely public and an adversary can monitor the network. Whereas the paper by Chaya Ganesh et al., which they assume that you have anonymous broadcast channels. And I'll explain some more on that in a bit. So there is a natural leakage in privacy preserving proof of stake if you're going to assume public networks, as in Ouroboros Krypsis. I'd also like to say that, for the rest of the talk, I'm going to be focusing on Krypsis only. And you can go to the paper for, other details on the other paper. So now what does it mean to be a public network? When a party creates a block and it's going to broadcast it over this public network, an adversary, for example, can just observe it can monitor the network and know, okay, this party has broadcasted so many blocks, so he probably has high number of stakes. The adversary can sort of trivially know that this guy is going to be is the winner of the lottery because he's the one who's proposing a block. So that's how a public network works, and this is how Krypsis is. Krypsis considers their network functionality to be. Okay. So now, what are the anonymous broadcast channels that I described earlier? So in an anonymous, with anonymous broadcast channels, how it works is the adversary does not know the source of this party. The adversary will see who is monitoring the network, can see that, okay, there are so many blocks that are getting broadcasted on the network, but the adversary has no idea who is creating this block. So in a little bit more detail, I want to present the anonymous broadcast functionality. And this is adapted from the network functionality presented by Madathil et al. In a paper called Bitcoin as a Transaction Ledger, a Composable Treatment. Now, as you will naturally expect, that for a network, like in any network functionality or like an anonymous broadcast functionality, you should allow the sending and the receiving of messages. That is, any party should be able to send a message to the entire network in an anonymous way, that is without its identity being attached to the message. And any other party should be able to fetch this message when, from its own local buffers when it has been added to the buffers. But to model, the real network, you also, and, to model what an adversary can do in the real world, you also need to, address this, like this, I have this also a part of the broadcast functionality. So crucially, the adversary can do two things. The first thing is the adversary can set delays to messages. So it cannot just arbitrarily delay like infinite, it cannot add an infinite delay to any message. It is bounded by some delta, but an adversary is allowed to, influence this, and, he can delay specific messages on the network. And two, the adversary is also allowed to do a partial multicast. Now, what does that mean? An adversary, when an adversary sends a message, it need not be, say, gossip to the entire network. The adversary can choose to send a message to a specific set of parties. Cool. So these are the two things that I want us to remember. And now there is a conjecture in Krypsiness which says that Ouroboros Krypsiness plus anonymous broadcast channels is going to give us a fully private proof of stake, that is without any leakage. Now, there's nothing wrong with the current Krypsiness paper because they don't assume any anonymous broadcast channels. They assume a public network. So they naturally do consider a leakage, and all their UC proofs and everything goes through. But it appears as a footnote which says that, okay, if you assumed anonymous broadcast channels instead, you would get a fully private proof of stake. So in this work, what we do is, even if you assume these ideal anonymous channels, ideal anonymous network as the underlying network, an adversary can leverage the network delay that I explained in the functionality earlier to violate the privacy of stakeholders in any proof of stake system, in any privacy preserving proof of stake system, be it Krypsiness or the other paper. Good. So now is a nice time to just discuss what the rest of my talk is going to be. So the first thing I'm going to be talking about is the attack on Krypsiness when paired with anonymous broadcast channels. I'm going to give you an overview of the attack there. The next step is going to be like a generalization of the attack, or like an abstraction of the attack to anonymous state machine replication protocols. Like just in general, I want to discuss, what are the is there there is a lower bound on how much anonymity one can hope to achieve, and I will be discussing that. Then the third thing is what is the practicality of this attack, or like I mentioned earlier, that an adversary can delay or send different messages to different parties. How possible is it for an adversary to actually do these things? Finally, I want to discuss some mitigation techniques and what are like some issues that come up with these mitigation techniques. Okay, so the first thing, let's talk about this attack on Krypsiness and when paired with anonymous broadcast channels. So before I begin, I just want to show that this is how I'm going to be representing the view of a party, basically with different times. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so basically, if you can see that that at different time, I'm going to say that in the view of the party, this transaction exists. So at time one, say if the party receives this, say this black transaction, this transaction is going to be in its view, and so on. Okay. Now, okay. So before I go further, I just want to say what is the aim of my adversary. He's going to try and say de-anonymous one guy. And what does that mean? When a block is proposed, the adversary is going to try and see, okay, the adversary wins if he can guess that Bezos was the one who created a block, say. So because Bezos is our target for this particular example. Now, how will the adversary mount this? Note that we are using ideal channels, ideal anonymous channels, as well as, on the application layer, everything is already anonymous according to the Krypsiness protocol. So the idea is the following. Our adversary is going to first send one particular transaction to Bezos at, say, time 1. And to all other parties, he's going to ensure that the message is delivered, the same transaction is delivered to them only after some delta delay, let's say 10 seconds. So at time 11, okay? And then the adversary just has to sit back and observe the next block on the chain, like all the blocks on the chain. So now if at time p equal to 9, this red transaction makes it to the block, which is there on the network, the adversary can know that this transaction has to have come from Bezos, right? Because the red transaction was received by all the other parties only after time 11, at time 11. So the adversary naturally knows that, okay, this has to have come from Bezos. So this is the intuition of our attack, and we present like a more formal attack in the UC setting in the paper. So for the details, I'm going to direct you to that. Okay, good. So now to the second part of my talk, which is the abstraction of the attack to anonymous state machine replication. So just to, before I go ahead, like one quick slide on what state machine replication is. So basically it's a protocol that is going to be run by all the servers, but here in our setting, think of them as these parties, the stakeholders, who are going to run a protocol and are going to agree on an ever-growing log. So it's going to be a linear log that's going to keep on growing. So the parties need to agree on what the next set of messages or transactions are that are going to go to the log. And crucially, we need two properties. We need more properties, but I'm just going to be describing two, which I will be using later. So the first one is T liveness. And now what does this mean? It basically means that if an honest T fraction of the parties have a particular transaction in their input, that transaction is going to make it to the output of the protocol. Okay, and two, what we need is the property that I'm going to call anonymity is any message sent by an honest party that is participating in the protocol is anonymous among a fraction of the total all the parties in the protocol. Okay, now to go a little ahead, like in this state machine replication, like anonymous state machine replication, we show that there is a lower bound on the anonymity that one can hope to achieve. Now, what is this lower bound? So the first thing is, let's assume that the adversary controls f fraction of the total state. And two, let's assume that the adversary can set the input of the parties. Now, this might seem sort of strong. I will show you why this is possible in a little bit of time. And now what is the minimum liveness guarantee that we can hope to achieve is when t is equal to 1 minus f. Now, what does that mean? It basically means that when all the honest parties have some x in their input, then this x is going to appear in the output of the protocol. So that's like the weakest liveness guarantee that one can hope to achieve. That if all, because we can't say anything about the malicious parties. So when all the honest parties have an input, the same input, we expect that this input is going to make it to the output. Now, naturally, one would assume or expect that we are going to achieve 1 minus f anonymity, right? So that is, if any message that is going to be sent or from the participating protocols, we would expect that the anonymity set of this party is 1 minus f. That is the set of all honest parties. But we show that this is not the case, and that we can achieve only at best either a minimum of 1 minus 2f or f anonymity. That is, an adversary will be able to shrink the anonymity set of the parties from 1 minus f to either like 1 minus 2f or f. So for example, when f is say 1 by 3 and we have 2/3 liveness, that is the set of all honest parties are going to, when they have the input, that particular transaction is going to be in the output, then we can hope to achieve only 1/3 anonymity. That is, the adversary will be able to split the parties into 1 by 3 fraction of state. So to showcase this, I'm going to be presenting two attacks called the tagging and the reverse tagging attack. And the basic idea of the tagging attack, like I just said earlier, is to shrink the anonymity set of the parties. So you'd expect that it's going to be 1 minus f when they're going to be participating, but an adversary is able to split this set of parties into two sets of 1 minus 2f and f each. That is, it's going to be able to shrink the anonymity set of the parties. And how are we going to do this? So, okay, now let's assume that, this is the set of parties each with their own stakes. And we have our input here, each party's input, and this is the output of the protocol. So now, if the input of all the parties are the same and they participate in this state machine replication protocol, then the output is going to be the same. The output is going to include the same black transaction. Now, what is the adversary going to try and do? The adversary is going to try and guess. The adversary's aim is to try and divide this, right? Like come up with a smaller anonymity set for the parties. So the adversary is going to try and guess that, hey, okay, the first guy is me. The adversary is going to try and guess maybe this guy has, makes up for f fraction of the total state. And the adversary gives a different transaction to this party and then observes the output of the protocol. The adversary sees that it's still the black transaction. Now, because it's a black transaction, he knows that this guy still does not make up for greater than f of the total state. Why? Because we know that if 1 minus f fraction of the total state is playing with the same input, then it has to output the same that value as the output by the liveness guarantee of a protocol, right? So now the adversary is going to guess that, okay, maybe Gates also has the same transaction. So Gates is like, now the adversary is going to give that particular Gates and me the same red transaction, and everybody else has the black transaction. Adversary observes output, it's still the black transaction. That means the parties that hold the black transaction may have greater than 1 minus f fraction of the total state, as I described from the liveness thing. Now, finally, when he adds Bezos as well, he observes that the output is phi, that is empty. So this must mean that the parties that have this black transaction make up less than 1 minus f, right? Otherwise, if it had greater than 1 minus f fraction of the total state, then the output will have to have included the black transaction. And the adversary knows that, okay, he by himself owns only f fraction of the total state. So this way, the adversary is able to infer that, okay, since I have f and these guys don't make up, greater than 1 minus f, the say Musk and Zuckerberg together make up less than 1 minus 2f fraction of the total state. and the rest of the guys make up greater than f fraction of the total stake. In this way, the adversary is able to shrink the anonymity set of the parties participating in the protocol. Now I'm going to describe a sort of a more extreme version of this same attack, where the idea is the same, but the adversary is going to try and in some sense try and estimate the stake of a particular party. And now let's go over this attack. So as I said earlier, the honest parties together make up 1 minus f fraction of the total stake, right? And the adversary is going to play with, say, f fraction. And now when everybody has the same input, the output is going to be the same black transaction. Now, what does the adversary do? The adversary's aim is to try and the adversary is going to try and play with a smaller fraction than f, and then observe what the output of the transaction is going to be. So the adversary splits himself into two, and plays with. So initially he was playing with 5 units of stake. Now he's going to play with 4 units of stake, and he observes that it's still the black transaction. So what does this mean? And he makes sure that Musk is going to play with a red transaction. And now the adversary is basically targeting Musk. The adversary is trying to estimate the stake of Musk. Okay, so now what happens? You have all the black transactions plus the adversary's 4 units of stake may make up greater than 1 minus f of the total stake, which is why it's a black transaction there. So the adversary goes again. He reduces his stake from 4 to 3 and sees that, okay, it is still the black transaction. Now, when he makes it 2, he notices that it's 5. So now what does this mean? So all the the parties that are playing with the black transactions plus his own 2 units of stake make up less than 1 minus f of the total stake. But we also know that the total parties, all the honest parties together make up 1 minus f fraction of the total stake. So using these two things, the adversary is able to infer that Musk must have greater than 2 units of the 2 units of stake. Right? In this way, the adversary has some idea on what the stake owned by each, the adversary can estimate, over time, of course, what the stake owned by each party can be. Okay, so now that I've mentioned these two techniques, remember that the first thing what I said was how an adversary can leverage the delay and mount an attack on krypsiness. The adversary was basically just sending a message later and then observing the blocking chain, right? And here I am described attacks where the adversary is actually setting the inputs of the parties to mount the attack. Now, is this feasible? So when we say that the adversary is setting inputs of the parties, it basically means that by delaying the delivery of the messages, the adversary is basically influencing the view with which a party is going to play in the protocol, right? So the adversary has to delay the messages long enough so that in the next execution of the protocol, the parties are playing with, say, different views. Now, a natural question is that that one would ask is, okay, so all this is theoretical stuff. Even if a message is sent to a party, it is going to be relayed immediately to all the other parties, right? So how are we actually going to be ensuring that there is a delay long enough that parties have different views in the execution of the protocol? Because as in a gossip network like Bitcoin and thing, as soon as a party receives a message, we say that, okay, it's going to relay to everybody else in the network. So this is where we sort of want to show that this delay power of the adversary, that is, that adversary is able to delay messages up to some delta time, is actually practical. And how we show this practicality is by exploiting some implementation design choices. And I'll note that this is one way to do it. Maybe there are other ways which we didn't investigate. The idea is mainly taken from this paper by Andrew Miller et al., where they present this technique called inv blocking. And the main idea is this, so that we know that in theory, when a transaction is received by a node, it's going to be relaying to all the other network, the entire network. But in practice, it's actually just going to relay to its immediate neighbors. And when a node receives a transaction from its neighbor, or it has been promised to receive a transaction, it is going to wait for any other party, before any other party tries to send the same transaction to him. In some more detail, let's just quickly go over what, let's assume that this is what the network looks like on, say, any of the gossip protocols, say. And we'll go into some more detail on, say, this specific connection, where the buffers of these parties are as such. Now, suppose Musk wants to send a transaction to Bezos. So the first thing he's going to do is send an inventory message for the transaction, which is basically a hash of the transaction, right? And Bezos is going to ask for a get data message for this transaction because this transaction one does not exist in his buffer. So he'll just match with this hash with all the hashes of the transactions that he owns. And he knows that this transaction does not exist for him. So he is going to send a get data. And then Musk will just send the transaction back to Bezos. Now, suppose when Bezos is waiting for the transaction from Musk, Gates decides to send, the inventory of this hash of the transaction to Bezos. Bezos here will just simply ignore it because he's waiting on the transaction to be received from Musk. And one more thing is that if somebody already has a transaction in their buffer and they receive an inventory message for that transaction, they'll simply ignore it. Okay, so now to come to the attack, how does the attack actually work? So now we have our adversary. Now, what does the adversary do? The adversary first sends an inventory message for a hash of this transaction to all the parties. The parties respond back with the get data message. And now when all three, because none of them have this new transaction that was created by the adversary, then the adversary is going to respond with the transaction only to Musk and Bezos and not Gates. Say Gates was our target here. Now, even if the other parties now who have received the transaction try to relay the message to say Gates is going to say no because he's waiting on the transaction from the adversary. Now, the idea here is that ideally you'd wait only there is a timeout until which each party waits. Like it's not like, oh, they're going to wait indefinitely for a message from this party who has to respond to the get data message. So this timeout is generally like, so we considered the in our implementation of the numbers that we picked up for our paper was from the Zcash implementation, Zcash blockchain implementation. It's also because there were no privacy preserving proof of stake implemented, so we picked up a privacy preserving blockchain. And we noted that the timeout is 120 seconds for for this wait when a party is waiting for the get data, and each block is created every 75 seconds. So we can see that the delay is long enough to mount any of the attacks that we were talking about earlier. All right, so these were the attacks, and now just quickly for the remainder of my time, I want to go over some of the mitigation techniques and what are some issues that you'd face. So the first natural idea would be, hey, why not just wait long enough? So Bezos is there, he's received a transaction at time one, and he knows, we know that the adversary can delay anything for a max of just 10 seconds. So why not Bezos just wait 10 seconds? He will know that, if I wait 10 seconds, the same transaction is going to be received by all the other parties. And then I can, the same transaction will be in the view of all the other parties. So it doesn't matter. But that is not the case because all parties would do the same. It's not like, the parties know that has this message been received by the other parties or not, right? So each party is going to wait for the same amount of time. So in some sense, in our setting, like with this mitigation, the only thing we're doing is that we're just shifting the time slot for the adversary to observe. So the same attack works where the adversary will just now observe, but not at time t equal to 9, but at time t equal to say 19. Okay, so that's the first mitigation, and that doesn't work. So the next idea is, can we use anonymous reliable broadcast to solve a problem? So what is anonymous reliable broadcast? So this is these are protocols that come with a very strong agreement property, which says that if any correct node delivers message M, that is an honest party has received a message M in its buffer, then every other correct node or every other honest party will also receive the same message M. Now to implement this over a permissionless network it's quite challenging. It'll be very difficult to do, but there exists new recent work of MPC based solutions like Blinder and Permix, which is great. But these solutions are sort of in the server client model. That is, there are a bunch of servers who are going to do the computation, and then parties are going to ask them for the next transactions or the next block. So this is not really suitable in a decentralized setting when you have so many parties and it's all permissionless. And moreover, existing solutions are still not yet scalable, and we'd expect that they can get better over time. And finally, one more thing is that this is equivalent to achieving consensus. It's like a chicken and egg thing, because we assume that all parties have to have the same set of transactions, which is the whole point of trying to do a proof of stake consensus protocol. That is that, okay, they all see the same state, right? So we're already achieving consensus if we assume that we have anonymous reliable broadcast in our protocols. The last idea is, is there a way to sanitize a local view of a party? Now, what does that mean? Suppose each party, instead of playing with its own local view, like a local view in its buffer, what if the parties played with a view that it received say globally, like, globally, everybody agreed or everybody saw the same set of transactions. We could do this maybe with, a bunch of parties that we call, say, the sanitizers, who using their own local buffers create like this global list of transactions and broadcast it to the network. Now, everybody in the network can just use this global set of transactions and, create their blocks and, do the whole lottery thing. In fact, this is an idea from like a presented paper called Saver by Apostolak et al., where they wanted to protect Bitcoin against routing attacks, and they assumed these trusted relay nodes that would send these transactions to all the other parties. So this is a nice idea, except that we need these nodes to be trusted. So if the parties are corrupt, like if these nodes who are creating this global view are corrupt, then we are back to square one, where the parties can send different messages and mount the same attacks that I described earlier. But if they're honest and say, since we're in a proof of stake setting and we are selecting them based on stake, then we would need to reveal the stake of these parties. But if we don't care, if these guys don't care about their privacy and the stake that they own, then we need some way to incentivize them to forego their privacy, which is not very clear how to do. So yeah, so that's about it. And just to summarize, like in this paper, we presented an attack leveraging the network delay to de-anonymize parties. A formal attack on a modified version of krypsis, that is when it's paired with ideal anonymous channels. And finally, like, since these attacks are in the network layer, it seems like, mitigating them with application layer solutions is just non-trivial. And for more details, please, you can see the paper and this link. Thanks.